Hello, everyone. Today we will discuss executive branch of government in different countries. So we'll talk about executive branch in parliamentary, presidential, semi-presidential systems, how they compare to each other, which one is better, how cabinets function in different types of regimes, and a few words about bureaucracy, which is tasked with implementing laws passed by legislatures. Thing about heads of states, sometimes presidents could be very unlucky, and they could be blamed for things like have no control. Example would be Jimmy Carter and the stuff that happened with economy and foreign policy crisis. I think to understand, and I think I told you this before, if you listened, watched these lectures before, American presidents are powerful in international relations in terms of things like starting a new war. American president can do it like quite easily. In terms of domestic politics, presidents can function effectively in terms of passing major reforms in recent years if they have full control of Congress, if a party or a president controls the Congress. If it doesn't, presidents can't do much domestically. So these are learning outcomes for our discussion about different types of systems, parliamentary, presidential, etc. Okay, a president usually represents a particular country, and there is usually a fixed term for that office. And this is a comparison of different types of heads of government. And there is a distinction. In some countries, head of government and head of state, it's a different phenomena, and you should be careful about this. So head of government in presidential system, it's usually election. In parliamentary system, head of government is head of majority party or head of coalition. Then another distinctions. Head of government in presidential system, usually there's a fixed term. Like in the United States, you can only be president twice for 8 years in total. That's it. In parliamentary system, you can see that in Germany or in UK, they have prime ministers who can last for very long if they're successful. And important distinction about responsibility before legislature. In presidential systems like in the United States, presidents are not accountable to Congress. The only thing that exists is impeachment in House and trial in the Senate, and as a result, president can be removed. But president needs to commit high crime and misdemeanors, bribery, treason, and the recent examples: Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, they have been impeached in the House, but they have been freed by the Senate. So impeachment procedure failed in those two cases. In parliamentary system, just for policy disagreement, Parliament can dismiss a cabinet, dismiss a head of state, and there is new election coming. Here in the United States, you cannot impeach a president for policy disagreements. At least it didn't happen before. And let's have a chat about head of state. Remember this distinction between head of state and head of government. In presidential system, it's usually the same. In parliamentary system, in UK, in Germany, those are like two different positions. And those things kind of similar to head of government. Comparisons for fixed term and responsibility before legislature. Things about roles of executive leaders. They have ceremonial powers. They preside over important events. They meet foreign dignitaries. They award state like highest government awards, like Medal of Freedom, whatever. And in countries like United States, president does both ceremonial and actual power. And in countries like UK, Germany, in UK, they have kings or queens who do like all those high-profile ceremonial meetings, grant major awards, stuff like this. But they have prime ministers who actually run countries. And these are learning outcomes for discussion when we compare executives in presidential regimes, how they look like. Few distinctions. In some elections of head of government and presidential systems could be direct by the people, or they could be indirect through electoral college, like in the United States. People vote, then electors vote in their states, and then Congress certifies the election. It's not direct as in other countries. And again, presidents usually have fixed terms, which usually in constitution directly or through constitutional amendment. Troubling a sign of recent decades in presidential systems, populism becomes more frequent. People like Donald Trump say things that they could not possibly achieve if or when they like elected. Few examples. Trump said he will build a wall. He had 4 years as president. He like didn't build it, or he said, "Oh, if I was a president, Putin will like would not have like invaded Ukraine," which is like not serious argument. So presidency and populism, they kind of go very close, at least recently. Important distinction about formal and informal powers. In Constitution itself, US presidents kind of limited in power, and they are. But for example, in Constitution, it says that only Congress can declare war. But recent history indicates that recent wars in Afghanistan, 2 Iraq wars, Vietnam War, they have been special military operations. Congress did not declare war in those cases. So presidents just grab power, and this is kind of informal power of president, which happened in the United States over the last 60 years. An important feature of a president, this bully pulpit idea that president can make a major address from Oval Office, announce a new major policy initiative or major achievement, and indicate a new vision for the country. And usually companies, CNN, Fox, whatever, they usually televise, broadcast such addresses live. So presidents do have this bullet pulpit ability. Important thing about approval ratings: if a president is popular, he can achieve a lot in terms of passing major reforms, and making large, bold public policy changes. If president is not popular, so far it's he in this country. Let's see if election 2024 election will result in first female president. So if president is not popular, he is not able to make major policy changes. And examples would be Barack Obama was quite popular when he was elected. He had like 60% approval rating. So he was able to pass financial reform, which was kind of undone by Trump administration lately. And he was able to pass healthcare reform, Affordable Care Act, which despite efforts, Trump administration failed to undo. So popular presidents can implement major policy change. And these are learning outcomes for next few minutes of our talk. Executive and parliamentary systems kind of take a thing. Let's say a couple of things. They have different titles. In Germany, it's chancellor. In UK, it's prime minister. Two things like limits to their power. If they have majority in parliament, whatever name of that parliament, they can rule kind of freely. If no party has a majority, it means that they have to create a coalition government, and then they're restricted in their policy changes, policy decisions. Important thing about parliamentary system, as we discussed previously, in presidential system, president can be removed through impeachment and then trial and then removal. But it should be for some kind of serious crime. You cannot impeach and then try and remove president for policy differences. In parliamentary system, just disagreement about policy difference can result in replacement of prime minister, as we have seen in British history in the last like 10 years. There have been a bunch of prime ministers changing each other, like, and this is comparison of different types of systems, which one is better and worse, and for what reason. So in this, what I would say is, in parliamentary system, you can make a large, significant policy change, and it could be pretty good for many people. I study healthcare policy, so in my dissertation, for example, in one of the chapters, I compare American healthcare system to healthcare system in Netherlands. In Netherlands, they have parliamentary regime, parliamentary system, and they have been able to implement more efficient and more efficient healthcare system, because in parliamentary system by design, how it works, you can make a large policy changes. In presidential systems like United States, you could have divided government, which is kind of norm in the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years. And since parties don't compromise much, it means it's extremely hard to make large policy changes. And even if you make them, they're still kind of limited. An example, again, would be Affordable Care Act, passed by Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and Harry Reid. And the reason it was limited, all those compromises they had to make just to get this thing to American political system. because of how it's structured. In parliamentary system, you can make larger and more efficient policy changes. So if it was up to me, America should be a parliamentary system. What I would say about this, most important is aspect of parliamentary systems. In many cases in recent history, they usually have coalition governments. No single party has a majority in parliament, which means they have to form coalitions, they have to compromise, and after like another election, they have to form another coalition government, have another compromise. So it means that a lot like that policy changes maybe not as drastic as we could have if we had just a majority rule, when one party changes another and changes direction of the country by 180 degrees. An important aspect of parliamentary systems, they usually allow for like a bunch of party. In presidential systems, especially with plurality voting. Remember, we discussed it a few times before. In those kind of systems, like in the United States, for example, they just have two-party systems, the way elections are held, those plurality voting rules. In parliamentary systems, where in many cases they have proportionate representation, it encourages creation of a bunch of parties which represent all kind of nuanced groups in society. In those two-party systems, you just have two parties, and like all nuance is kind of gone. Things about presidential systems. Transfer of power is kind of predictable. Let's say America, it usually never had major issues, with the exception of Donald Trump, and after he obviously lost an election, which resulted in January 6th riot. But for the most part, transfer of power in this country is peaceful. Some of the problems with those systems, partisan polarization, which is a product, as we discussed before, social media, cable news, self-selection, when people who have a particular policy views tend to move to regions where those policy views are like prevalent. And this graph indicates increase in partisan polarization in recent years, and sadly, it's still going on. And this would be learning outcomes for discussion for next few minutes. We'll discuss countries which represent some kind of mix of presidential and parliamentary systems. And the structure of the power is kind of different from country to country. For example, in France, which is a semi-presidential system, where president in constitution is responsible for national defense and foreign policy, and prime minister is responsible for domestic policy, and he is usually head of very close to a majority party in French parliament. But if in parliament and in president they have different political parties, then president becomes kind of neutered in his powers. So in my view, France is actually kind of close to American system recently in terms of how it functions. and this is ranking of different kind of systems based on the freedom. How many systems with different types of government, parliamentary, presidential, semi-presidential, how many of them are like democracies? And this would be learning outcomes for discussion in the next few moments. Important distinction. In presidential systems, president gets to pick his members of the cabinet, and he kind of dominates agenda. In parliamentary systems, members of the cabinet, like ministers of defense, agriculture, whatever, they're also members of parliament, and they're like strong politicians in their like own rights. They're not like servants. Important thing about parliamentary systems, if we have a majority government where one party controls most seats in the parliament, then members of the cabinet are quite loyal to prime minister. If it's a coalition government, then not so much. They're more loyal to their own political parties. And lastly, we discuss bureaucracies, how they function, what role they play in implementing the laws. And this would be learning outcomes. Important thing about bureaucracies, they're very strict hierarchy. They're all in the system where managers impose regulations on lower level employees, and they usually follow orders. And important thing is, since bureaucracies do so many things, manage healthcare system, educational system, transportation systems, all kinds of sectors of the economy, they usually could be like one of the largest employers in economy of any country. And these are main characteristics of bureaucracies in current political environment. Again, hierarchy, they follow orders. They have division of labor. Some people do manage public policy in agriculture, others manage public policy in defense, in like commerce. There are lots of sectors of the economy where there is a particular agency which is responsible for imposing certain rules. Extremely important bureaucracies make their decisions based on rules which they must adhere to. If they don't, their decisions could be blocked in courts. I remember we discussed the role of judicial review of the courts. Lots of decisions issued by U.S. presidents or federal agencies in the United States ended up being blocked by U.S. Court system. So if there are like any violations in the way a decision was made, it could be blocked by a court. An important thing about bureaucracy, they maintain records of whatever decision-making process they're doing. So you can go back and check how a decision was made. For the most part, they try to be impartial, but it's still like, for example, if you work in healthcare agency when Trump got elected and he tried to sabotage implementation of Affordable Care Act, you would be probably like pissed off about direction of the government. So this impersonality is not always like a role. And professionalization, important aspect of bureaucracy. Like the higher your level is, more likely you would require some advanced degrees like masters in public policy in particular area, or sometimes a PhD degree in public policy. Important change that happened in civil service, and you might heard about this if you followed presidential election in 2024, when discussion is that Trump team are going to change civil service rules. Thing is, in 19th century, there was a patronage system where the main criteria for selecting a person to work in federal government would be loyalty. And currently, when president gets a job, he can appoint about 900 Senate confirmed political employees, political appointees, and several hundred political appointees which don't require Senate confirmation. But the vast majority of bureaucracy in any country, I would say developed country, is not subject to like changes depending on who is new head of government. If you get a job in federal government, you usually work there until you retire. Thing about bureaucracies, when they try to issue new regulations, they need to in this country, United States, they have to follow Administrative Procedure Act of 1947 or something, which requires them to post a notice of proposed rulemaking currently on the internet. They do it on the internet and say, okay, in 3 weeks or in 3 months, we are going to issue new regulation. And if you have opinion about this, feel free to express your opinion. In one of my projects, I'm studying one of those regulations, and in many cases, it's just people who say, oh, do this regulation or don't do this regulation. But in some cases, there are like formal letters written by interest groups, like a 20-page letter go into like all kinds of legal argument about a new regulation. And if majority of interest groups agree, like disagree on a particular aspect of a regulation, federal bureaucracies, they just have to give in to interest group influence. I can give you an example from my own research. I study short-term plans, and at some point, Trump administration in 2018, they issued regulations saying that short-term plans should be their duration should be extended from 3 months to 3 years. And this law should be universal across the United States. And what happened, lots of powerful interest groups like National Association of Insurance Commissioners and individual commissioners, officers across the country from Alabama to California, they said it should be up to states to decide the duration of short-term plans. It should not be federal universal rule. And interestingly, Trump administration gave in. They changed their mind because lots of influential interest groups said, oh, we don't like this aspect of this new regulation. So working with interest groups when issuing new regulation is very important function of bureaucracies. And this is the idea of iron triangles. Idea is kind of simple. Let's say healthcare, how healthcare policy is set. In Congress, you have a few committees where like their jurisdiction is healthcare. In bureaucracy, you have Department of Health and Human Services, and then you have a few agencies like Centers for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, things like that. And you have a few, not a few, like in terms of healthcare, there are like thousands of interest groups, and decisions are made and new policies are set in communication between those three types of agents: Congress, the specialized committees, specialized agencies in bureaucracy, and interest groups which are concerned about a particular public policy area. Thank you very much.